Welcome to Help, I'm a Parent, Christian Parenting in the Real World. We're so happy that you've invited us to enter into your home, your church, or wherever you may be gathered today. We're delighted you've joined us on this program as we discuss God-given role of parenting.
We're your hosts, Drs. Claudio and Pamela Consuegra, and together we serve as the Directors of Family Ministries for the North American Division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We believe that one of the most important roles you will ever play is that of being a parent.
In the midst of a secular society, it's easy to leave God out of the training of our children. The purpose of this series is to not only put God back into the equation, but to place Him at the very center.
Parenting stretches us and shapes us like no other experience on this earth. It is a sacred responsibility, and there is no higher calling. It is a calling that has its shares of joy as well as challenges. It's a calling that demands a big investment on your part if it is to yield results. And yet those returns on your investment will last throughout eternity.
Today we're going to talk about puberty and purity. While these tween years are marked by numerous transitions, the hormonal changes is perhaps one of the most obvious of all. You can see these changes happening right before your eyes. It is hard to hide the fact that your baby is growing up.
In the first series of this program, we addressed the notion that teaching your child about sexuality actually begins at birth. In other words, this should not be the first time you have approached this subject with your child. In the early years, you utilized age-appropriate topics to help your child understand the differences between male and female bodies. You did this by using the appropriate names for the parts of the body, and you created an atmosphere in your home where your child knows that they can talk to you about any question they may have on sexuality. But now it's time to take this conversation to the next level.
That's right. You need to talk to your child about sexuality and purity. In fact, if you're not talking to your kids about sex, then you may be the only one who's not. They're hearing about it on TV, in music, at school, from friends, and through advertisements of every kind. How do you approach this topic with our children? And how do we guide them to make choices to live a life of purity?
We're very pleased to have the expertise of Pastor Volodymyr Grinchenko. He is a husband, a happy father of 4, 2 boys and 2 girls, and an enthusiastic minister who loves Jesus Christ and His people. Currently, he serves as the senior pastor at the Willowbrook Seventh-day Adventist Church, located in Boonesboro, Maryland.
We're also pleased to have Pastor Marilyn Scott joining us today. Pastor Scott is the associate pastor of the Spencerville Adventist Church in Maryland. She enjoys working with people of all ages, but her work with children brings her special joy. She has over 15 years of experience in children and youth ministries, and Pastor Scott and her husband Greg have 1 daughter. Pastor Scott, Pastor Grinchenko, so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Right before we begin our conversation with our pastors today, we're going to take a look into the home of the Roberts family, and they're going to share with us on this topic of puberty and purity.
I didn't have that birds and the bees talk from my dad when I was a child. I learned a lot of what I came to know about sexuality from my environment. So when I became a parent, I already had an agenda. It's like, these are some of the things that I don't want my kids to experience, and these are things that I think they should experience. So this is what they were laughing at? Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's nothing here to be ashamed of. Talking about sexuality and purity is something that we take very seriously and we talk about with our children on a fairly regular basis because they can't help it. They're in the world today where there is electronic media all around them. So in the respect of sexuality and purity, we're constantly on guard.
As a parent, you need to help them make the decisions for themselves. You've got to prepare them. This is what's out there, and this is how you need to conduct yourself and the decisions that you need to make.
You want to make it so that they're not afraid to talk about it, and that's what we try to enforce with them is nothing, no matter what you think or what the topic is, you can always come to us and talk about it.
What you let into your mind doesn't go away. There's not an erase button. It's there. And it becomes lenses and scopes that you look through everything else the rest of your life through. The best way to help them prepare for making those decisions is to have that open dialogue and discuss it as openly and frankly and as often as you possibly can.
That sounds very good, what Beth said there at the end. The conversation about the birds and the bees.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't even want to say the conversation about sex.
Mm-hmm.
We still talk about it. You know, you've been working with parents and young people for a long time. Has anyone told you that they have had those conversations, or they are still worried about having the conversation with their kids?
Well, for me, we do have parents that come to us, and specifically to me, I've had a father come to me and said, "Oh, my boy just asked me the question, and I don't know what to tell. What do you have? What can I say?"
Yeah.
And it really, at first, it kind of takes you by surprise. But if you do plan ahead, you can be prepared. In fact, it starts early on, as it was mentioned with the Roberts family, starting early on to start having that comfortable feeling to talk about anything and not wait so long.
It would begin then when?
Since childbirth, I guess.
Yes.
That's really the
Yes.
idea.
Right.
Appropriately for their age, you know, to
Correct.
talk, but not even talking. Usually we think about talking, presenting the topic, but I believe kids learn the difference when they look at the parents.
Yes.
How father and mother interact as husband and wife.
Yes.
Different hugs, different
Yes.
affection. They already get the idea that it's different. And then it will all like fall into place like a beautiful puzzle. And
Yes.
it just makes sense in the end.
It becomes a normal part of everyday life, not
Yes, I agree
just
with
the
you.
taboo, strange conversation
Right.
that we will have one day.
And that's very important too, because as we talk about this topic, we're not talking about the talk as if it's one point in time, one conversation, but rather I hear you both say it's a life that you live. It's a
Yes.
model you set. It's a whole set of conversations.
Exactly.
And not just one conversation at one time that we're going to sit down and have the talk.
That example that the parent said is very important, because if it starts early on, that's what brings the comfort of a child to come to the parent.
They
But if
came
they
to
don't
the
see
parent,
it,
that's right.
if they don't see it, they're going to be scared and they're going to go somewhere else. They're curious. The questions are there. They're going to find the answers.
Right.
And it's most important that they get it at home.
But I was curious about something you said. For those parents that come to you, though, and say, my
Yes.
child asked me the question, then what would you tell them, or what did you tell them?
I've actually provided some resources. However, I've encouraged them to be sure that that conversation is constantly happening, that there are open the channels of communication about any topic, not just that, but much more than
Yeah.
sex or
So it almost,
any other conversation.
almost sounds to me that maybe the parents need to be taught
Yes.
so that they can have the comfort level to
Yes.
talk to their kids.
If they're willing to be taught. Because sometimes,
Yes.
in my experience, I don't know,
Yes,
maybe I'm wrong.
yes.
But if parents see a story in the Inside magazine or some of the Sabbath school materials where a boy likes a girl, they're not comfortable with their kids to actually be exposed to a story like this. And they say, no, it's not age appropriate. But if you look at the kids are very excited to read a story like this. They want to hear as many details as possible.
That's right,
But parents maybe have this false shyness,
Yeah.
and they shy away from helping their kids to know more about it.
They're kind of afraid that if they say anything, they're planting the thought in the kids' minds.
Yes.
When in reality, again, those thoughts come from television, from iPads, from cell phones, from their friends. So when we think that they are ignorant, we have to realize that we're the ones that are
That's
ignorant.
right.
Exactly right.
You know, and we hear the concern so often from a single mother who may have sons. Very uncomfortable with talking on this topic to her son, or a single father that's raising a daughter. Do you have any suggestions in that case where a single parent is raising a child of the opposite gender and just very uncomfortable or not knowing how to approach it.
Interesting that you said that. This is exactly how I grew up. My brother and I, we were raised by a single mother. And in that time, we were not Christians yet. But even when we became Christians later on, our mom never spoke with us. She never talked with us about intimacy or sex. So when now I grew up, I actually called her back and I said, Mom, you never spoke with us about it. Why? And she's like, no, it was a topic that you're not supposed to talk about. And I told her, I honestly wish that you would talk with me about it because the picture of intimacy and sex that I got was from the street. And it was not a nice one.
Distorted.
It was not a nice one, yes. And when I said it to her, she's like, oh, I really wish that I would knew it when I was younger. And I said, well, thank you for telling me because now I know as a young father that I would not miss this opportunity.
But having grown up in a home like that, Pastor, today, if you were talking to a single mother who is raising a son, from your own experience, what advice or what counsel would you give them?
I think usually the perspective out there is that father talks to a son and a mother talks to a daughter. I would honestly challenge it. I think a parent talking to a child, this is the right way to look at it. And I would suggest any mom out there, just go ahead and talk with the son. And if the trust is there in relationships, actually, I would think your child will help you to go on in conversation by asking you questions with a level of trust that is already there in relationships. And the child will help a parent to talk about it. So it's just making this first step, just asking the question or giving an opportunity to ask a question and just see where the child is. And usually it will work.
Given that, again, let's just say that you haven't had that conversation all along, which should be the case. That's the way it should be. But let's just say that it hasn't happened. What kinds of things do you think are important for a parent to talk to their child about? What kinds of things should they be informed of? What would be included in that conversation? Let's just say, for instance, let's start with a girl. Maybe Pastor Scott can help you with that.
Yes.
I think very early on, just being comfortable talking about the body as a whole. Just
so anatomically speaking.
Biologically.
Especially, we're talking about kids ages 8 to 12. So what's happening to girls at that time?
Well, definitely their hormones are already in progress, and they're curious, starting early on by having just conversations that seem mundane at best, will definitely bring the topic naturally.
I like what you said, mundane conversation. In other words, everyday common
It's a normal thing.
Not let's sit down and talk about this, but it so happens that this
Natural.
happened.
Well, I grew up in a family where I did have mom and dad. However, mom was the one who took that role. Dad never spoke to us about it. But there was one thing I always remembered my mom saying, I want you to learn the truth from me, not from someone else.
That's so important.
When I heard information that I trusted what my mother taught me. When I heard information that was contradictory to that, I challenged it. That's not the way that I heard it. This is not the way it was.
And that's the point that we want parents to know, that when you talk to your kids, you're actually helping them to counteract the incorrect information they're picking up from the streets, from friends, from who knows where.
And I follow that with my daughter as well. In fact, I would say that my biggest victory was overhearing her saying things to her friends that I had shared with her. And I'm like, yes. Okay, yes, it's stuck on.
Makes you feel good.
Yes.
And your efforts have paid off.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Interesting that you mentioned about the age category. So I have 4 kids. I have a 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So all of them ask questions in a different perspective. That's right. A 3-year-old and a 5-year-old would say, like my 5-year-old daughter would say, oh, one day I'll meet a prince like a princess would. So yes. So it's one of the ways of doing it.
The difference in ages.
Yeah.
Well, we want to continue this conversation about purity and puberty. And so come back with us in just a couple of minutes, and we will continue our talk with Pastor Scott and Pastor Grinchenko and learn more about how to talk to our kids about puberty and purity. You can probably already tell that we will not be able to cover every area, every concern, or every question you may have in the short time that we have together. Parenting will continue to produce new challenges and new questions every day. As our children grow and change, so do the parenting challenges we face.
And therefore, our goal is to continue this conversation with up-to-date resources and practical parenting tips that you can apply in your day-to-day parenting journey. We will do this online via our website, www.helpimaparent.org. And there you may keep up to date on all of our newly released parenting resources, supplemental products, and even find additional materials to download free of charge.
You're also invited to submit any questions that were not answered for you, subscribe to an electronic newsletter, read a blog for parents, and much more. Again, the accompanying website is helpimaparent.org.
And in addition to that website, we also have a Facebook page where we post daily words of encouragement and resources. So look us up on Facebook, Help, I'm a Parent. And remember, share that Facebook post with the friends in your social network.
It is our desire that this resource will assist you in your God-given role as a parent by using principles that are firmly grounded in the Word of God. Now let's get back to our conversation with today's guests. Welcome back to our conversation about human sexuality with our tweens. And we're talking with Pastor Scott and Pastor Grinchenko. And by the way, Pastor Grinchenko, before the break,
Yes.
you were telling us about your 4 kids and the different ages. And I'm curious, I'm guessing they ask different questions because of the different ages.
Of course.
Can you give us an example of, because we're talking about the tweens, an example of what the older kids would ask and the types of questions that they would ask you?
So you heard my 5-year-old.
Yes.
So the older ones are even more specific.
Yeah.
So my girl, who is 9, would say, so Papa, where will I find a husband for myself when I will grow up?
Okay.
How to do it? My son already has a plan. He loves Ukrainian girls so much that he plans when he will grow up to go back to Ukraine and find himself a wife.
Find himself a
And
girl
he's asking,
there.
Mom, where were you? What city you from? Because I will go to that city and everything.
Same.
So they already have a plan, okay?
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing. And so already, again, they have that comfort in the conversation with you.
Yes, of course.
About having a husband or where or how to find a wife.
Yeah, and I learned that when they ask this question,
Yeah.
for me, it's very important to be at ease and in a joking manner with the laughter, to tell them about it, that they would feel at ease to
Have
talk
they
to
ever
me
asked
about
you a
it.
question that maybe shocked you a little bit?
Oh, yes.
Like what?
They did. Well, my girls are growing, their body is changing. So my 9-year-old did approach me about it. And I was telling her that now, because she is older, she cannot just change anywhere. She needs to go, privately and change. So it's all these small details that fit into puzzle, and it just makes sense after all. And my son the same way, it's not like the small kids are running around, baby toddlers. It's different.
Now, you're a father, so you didn't just say, go ask your mother.
No, I didn't. Well, the reason for it, because for me, as I was grow up, I feel that I missed out on it. And I knew that I do not want to repeat the same mistake in my life with my kids. So I'm trying to be as open as possible, as approachable as possible, that kids would ask me anything, and I would feel comfortable enough to tell them what I think is right.
And something he's mentioned that I'm realizing, the innocence of a child, and for him to tell her to go somewhere and change, she's so comfortable around him that she just simply does it. But it also goes to the responsibility as parents, as we are guiding, as they're maturing, as they're asking those questions, finding those opportunities to make them teachable moments for them and continue on the conversation. It's normal. What
So
you're doing is normal. But now that you're getting a little older, this is the proper way to do it.
That's right. So in addition to talking to our children about the changes that are taking place in their bodies and having open lines about that. We also want to be sure to talk to them about purity and God's plan for sexuality and intimacy. How do we approach that topic with children this age, this whole topic of purity?
It's a hard one, you know, especially in our society,
Yes.
with what kids do and they are capable of doing. You know, a good example would be, you know, the way how they treat each other when they grow older. That the way how they play with boys and girls now changes, and they need to be able to show respect to a girl if it's a boy, you know, and the way how they approach and how gently they can play, not being as a rough tomboy as maybe it was when they were younger.
So
And-
proper roles then is one of the
Yes.
areas. Okay.
Yes.
And the proper role modeling that you are experiencing together as a couple
Yes.
that teaches them the access that they have to information nowadays through technology and media will definitely give them the wrong impression, the wrong information. It behooves us to be able to do just the right thing,
Yeah.
to teach them as parents, grandparents, close friends, making sure that our children are getting to the right information.
And you bring up another very important topic that really is included in this, because you talked about, you know, the online presence and technology. So if we relate that to this whole idea of sexuality and puberty and purity, how do we teach our children to be aware of, because we know they're going to be on social media, they're going to have a presence on media. So how do we teach them to be aware of maybe sexual predators or inappropriate text messages or inappropriate websites to go to? How do we merge that with these conversations with our children?
We had boundaries for our daughter while she was getting into, back then was MySpace and,
Yeah,
and
that's
other types of avenues to get into. We'd had some parental controls, but the way we approached it with her is this is not to hide anything or to prevent you from not having fun and not enjoying or accessing the information that you need to get. But it's important for us to build trust with one another. And those controls would allow us to see what she was doing and also expressing to her the dangers and things that she might find.
Okay.
So there was always open conversation. So it was more of a protection
Yes.
rather than prohibition.
Right.
More of, yes, if you're not careful, you could get into dangerous ground here. So having the conversation there is very important.
I've heard very often, though, that tweens and youth or young adults even don't want to hear the scary stuff. You know, don't tell me that I'm going to get pregnant. I've heard those things. Those things don't even scare me anymore. And yet, I remember the news just a few years back of a school where it seemed like a dare between the
Yes.
girls, where they would say, let's see who gets pregnant.
Wow.
And we almost put the responsibility only on the girl.
Right.
How do you teach boys the importance of respect and the importance of purity?
Boy, I have two. One is a 3-year-old, another one is a 12-year-old.
Yeah,
And I think if I will start teaching him at 12, it's a little bit late.
that's right.
So at 3 years old, I even tell my little boy what he can do and he cannot do, and where he can touch and where he cannot touch a girl. So when he is 12, it's not a shock for him, but he naturally grew up in it. In the same way with my 12-year-old, he sees all of these changes in himself and in others.
Yeah.
And by God's grace, we're good friends, we're buddies. We play together, we have fun together. So he asked me all these questions, and I need to be very candid with him. I need to be very simple and open and
That's right.
really say it as it is.
Right.
If I will portray the shyness, then he would feel the same shyness as say, well, and we will not be able to have this.
It becomes sort of mysterious.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
something to hide, something to keep as a secret.
Right.
And along with the same lines that Marilyn were talking and you were talking, my 3-year-old knows how to turn on the computer and run the whole media shop.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Now my 12-year-old is even teaching me how to do certain things on the computer.
there you go.
They will
I
do
believe you
that.
can relate to
They
that. You can
know.
relate to that, right? So the idea is, what we have a rule in our house, and I keep the same rule. If I'm on the computer, I'm in a public place, in the kitchen,
Okay.
open area. When you come in, kids can see what I'm doing, and when they're doing whatever they're doing on a computer or on a tablet, they can see, I can see it as well.
I love what you
And
just
that-
said, Pastor. I keep the same rule. And I think that's so important because you are modeling that. You know,
Exactly.
it's not something I'm asking you to do, but hey, I'm doing it as well. So I think that's a key
Exactly.
point.
The example is important.
And what about
Right.
the girls? How do you have the conversation with a girl? You have a daughter.
Sure. For me, I go back to the Bible, Psalm 139, where God talks about before you were formed in your mother's womb, I knew you. And I approached it that her purity was a gift from God, and a gift that she needed to preserve and protect
Yeah.
until the right time.
Yeah.
When she would marry, when she would find the person that God had chosen for her.
Yes. Which means then from the beginning you had to help her develop a relationship with
Yes.
God so that she would care about God.
Certainly, and that protecting that gift is of utmost importance. We had those conversations many times, and I know it is difficult for these young people, wherever they are. These things are coming at them, and once I think once you've shared it with them, they'll remember.
Yeah, yeah. Take advantage of the time.
Yes.
Take advantage of that moment to talk with them on a regular basis.
That's true.
Yes.
We could talk about this for a long time
Yes, we
too,
can.
but our time unfortunately has come to an end. Thank you so much for being with us and for your practical advice on dealing with this so very important topic.
Thank
of
you so much.
Thank you so
purity
much for
and
inviting
purity.
us.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
And we also want to thank you for joining us as we explore this topic of puberty and purity. Now it's time for you to open your parenting manual that accompanies this resource. Read the material over and discuss any thoughts or questions that come to mind with your group members. To help you get started, we have included some discussion questions and group activities.
We also want to remind you to visit our parenting website, helpimaparent.org, and there you will find many additional resources and materials.
As much as you love your children, God loves them even more. He has appointed you as their stewards, their caretakers during their lives on earth. More important, He has entrusted you with the task of preparing them for their forever home in heaven with Him.
God never said that parenting would be easy, but He did say that He will never leave you or forsake you. The Creator who knit our children together in the womb and has numbered the very hairs on their heads holds the blueprint for their lives. Claim His promises and invite Him to co-parent with you.
Join us next time on Help, I'm a Parent, Christian Parenting in the Real World, when we will discuss ways that you can keep the lines of communication open with your preteen child. Until then, we pray for blessings upon you as you help your child through the transitions of puberty and teach them the importance of purity. May an abundance of God's blessings be realized by your family today.